If you were at a concert, you just show it again.
Gosh. And thank you all for staying. And just for being here.
So, Richard, how do you feel?
Pretty good. I'm in a weird headspace because we just finished mixing it and we've got like 2 DCPs playing simultaneously in different auditoriums. So I've been trying to compare the mixers on the one upstairs to the one down here, which puts me in a very weird place. It'll probably take like a few years for me to figure out quite how I feel.
Yeah. So are you, in general with your films, are you one of these filmmakers that is never quite satisfied with the piece? You see things that you could fiddle with more every time you watch it, or do you get to a point where you're like, yeah, I'm satisfied with that?
Yeah, I always like to use all of the materials available to me. And this thing's still about 3 months away from general release. So there's still enough time for me to tinker with little bits and pieces of it. So yeah, still taking notes.
What are some of the things that you identify as like needing little adjustments?
Oh, they're completely invisible to the outside world. They're all, at the moment, all just audio mix things. I'm thinking about different levels and some sound effects and lines of dialogue and things that are dropping around at different times. I can't touch the picture cut anymore.
How much input were you able to have over the editing and the cut of the actual storytelling?
A pretty reasonable degree. Obviously, we made the initial cut, and then there was a fair amount of horse trading over a bunch of different things, notably over Nick's performance, which was, I think, a slight act of cowardice. The powers that be pulled back quite a lot on Nick at the 11th hour, so there's 2 or 3 things which I hope get reinstated at some point further down the line.
Interesting. So you would have preferred to have him a little more unleashed?
Yeah, I've got no issue with the fact that it's horrible and tragic and funny at the same time.
I think I tend to agree. I was a little surprised by how restrained most of the performance was.
Yeah, I thought it could have been worse and it could have been funnier.
You talked about sound, and you mentioned ultrasound, and talk a little bit about that for people who aren't sound engineers.
Yeah, well, a lot of the score and the sound design keeps pushing into either very heavy bass or very high frequencies, which is the reason why I'm still not happy with the mix of the DCP. That's the outer limits of the human auditory range, just like ultraviolet and infrared are the outer limits of the spectrum that we can perceive, and presumably some kind of ultra-dimensional intruder into our reality we perceive as an ultraviolet or infrared blur. And the sound would be up beyond our range, just as the olfactory spectrum would probably smell a very strong, sweet smell, or a smell of brimstone. But the fingerprints of an ultra-dimensional object, the three-dimensional shadow of a fourth-dimensional thing that we can't perceive.
That's really interesting. So do you use that in all of your films?
No, just this.
it does feel like the soundtrack in a lot of your films becomes very important and essential to the storytelling.
Yeah, always is, but yeah, in colour there's a particular brief to try and push against the outer limits of what humans can perceive. And so yeah, kind of in the nature of the beast.
So I really liked that Lavinia was kind of her story. You follow her from the beginning to the end. How did you decide to come at it from that angle as opposed to being kind of the omniscient outside of the family? And kind of, to me, it was more her story where we're experiencing a lot of the things through her filter. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I guess that was one of the things we had to bring to the material. I mean, much as I love Lovecraft, it's the 21st century, and there's certain things that one has to deal with when you go into Lovecraft country as such. I was very keen on moving the story into the present day, just because I felt that although I've got a plush Cthulhu back home that I cuddle up with at night, I don't want the mythos to be quaint or cute. That the ultra-dimensional threat had to be a clear and present danger to us now or to generations to come. So first of all, I wanted to move it into the present, and then we also needed to deal with not just Lovecraft's misanthropy, but with the racism and the misogyny. So I felt that the very first scene, which is how we derived the first scene with Ward, the first black Miskatonic University graduate running into Lavinia, this atypical Lovecraftian heroine out in the woods.
That was a beautiful scene, by the way. When it opens, you almost feel like you're watching a fantasy film.
Yeah, that was the idea. That we wouldn't really know what time period we're in until it's interrupted.
Talk a little bit about the creatures, the alpacas and the mutations and...
Well, I could always use more of them. The Colour Out of Space is still a very small movie, so we were racing against it, and we tried to do as much of it practically as possible, which was tricky at times. And then we were able to eventually recruit a warehouse full of Spanish computer nerds in Madrid to basically go over it all with VFX hairbrush and try and cover up the seams and take out the rods and wires. Talk about the shooting of the film. Sorry, I'm jumping all over here, but there's so much to talk about. I'm sure that we could all sit here and talk for hours and hours, but I'm interested in the process of the shooting because it was a pretty short shoot for a feature film, yeah? Yeah, it is a low-budget movie. It was a very short prep. We had 6 weeks of prep time. We realised we had to shoot it at the end of January to fit a window of opportunity that Mr. Cage had, and if we'd missed that, he would have been unavailable for the next 3 years or something. So we had to do it, which gave us 6 weeks prep from the end of the first week in December, just before Christmas, and we had to start last week in January. And then we had 4 weeks with Nick to shoot him out and 6 weeks to do the whole thing. The fact that we were in January meant that we couldn't shoot in New England, and in fact we couldn't shoot pretty much anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. So we couldn't shoot Savannah, Georgia, we couldn't shoot Ireland, we couldn't shoot Belgium, or most of the places anyone knew anything about were under heavy snow. And we ended up shooting in Sintra, Portugal, because it was the only place where there was deciduous trees and things were still green and where we could get alpacas.
So why alpacas?
As you know, Colour Out of Space has been adapted a few times before. It's an enduring classic. And the one thing I was keen to avoid was a scene where you see an exterior long shot of a farm and a meteor hits the ground and some hick farmer comes out and pokes it, and I wanted to avoid having a cow or a chicken. And I thought, it's either going to be alpacas or ostriches or Angora goats, maybe. We settled on alpacas because they're easier on camera. Ostriches kick.
In the scene where Jolie Richardson cuts her fingers off, horrible, and then was that just kind of a vehicle to get them out of the house for a while? And then so let the kids kind of figure out what's going on?
Yeah, I guess to some extent. I was very keen to have the kids home alone trying to deal with it. Just because I don't know, but I think we've all had days like that when when the parents are out and a kind of localized kind of mass hysteria thing starts happening with oneself or one's sibling, and nothing kind of makes sense until
like the Cat in the Hat.
Yeah, I mean, it was one thing I was keen to go after with the Gardener kids.
So Tommy Chong's character Ezra. You have a couple characters here that are in touch with the supernatural, spiritual world, like Lavinia being her pagan Wiccan practice, and Ezra being kind of in touch with they're in the ground, man, things. And Tommy Chong is based on Yorani or sorcerer.
Yeah, Tommy Chong's actually based on a fusion of a couple of people that I used to know in the French Pyrenees, notably Yorani, the sorcerer guy who unfortunately passed last year. Yorani was the only person I knew who actually believed in Yog Sothoth and celebrated Yog Sothoth Day once a year, which he thought was on Candlemas. This had happened because of a French translation of the Hay Wilson Necronomicon. For some bizarre reason, the Simon Necronomicon, which is widely available in paperback in the US, is completely unavailable in France. But there's a mass distribution French language translation of the Hay Wilson Necronomicon instead, which seems to have quite widely saturated the place. And Yorani had picked up a copy of this at some point 30 years back or whatever, and really believed it. So I didn't want to disavow him of his views, so I don't think he would have fully understood the difference between reality and fiction anyway, even if I tried to explain it. And there was an episode about 2-3 years ago, and I believe it's in fact even shot on videotape by Henrik Muller, who I hope got in tonight. You're there, Henrik, you were there that day. Where Yorani did a ritual to Yog Sothoth to make this project happen.
Yes. I turned off the camera because it was going on too long, the ritual, and I sent it to Yorani, and he became very paranoid and said that it was some kind of supernatural intervention, and that's why the camera was turned off. He was very upset about it.
And a storm did blow in the latter part of that thing.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, Yorani died just before colour got greenlit. So when there is some kind of alternative world where one might imagine that Yorani's life was the price that that was demanded for the production to happen. But yeah, lo and behold, the thing came together. We recreated his house in Sintra, Portugal. The Portuguese art department felt that his ghost was haunting the set, and kept running to show me photographs of strange light blurs and things and them taken on the set, but I tried to stay rational about it, and I had this sense I could almost hear Yorani's voice over my shoulder saying, "Yes, but who is this Chong, and why is he playing me?" So yeah, we had to do something. Yeah, there's another guy as well who's also dead, who Henrik never got to meet because he died a bunch of years ago. Jean de Rigny, who was another hermit living in the Pyrenees in the south of France, who lived on the slopes of Mount Bucharest, which is an extinct volcano. And Jean de Rigny, he kind of fits into it because in the late 80s and early 90s he made a series of analog audio recordings of what he claimed were aliens moving around beneath his house, which was the last house at the top of the river by the source. And then in the 90s, these recordings were played on French national television, which eventually led to an outbreak of mass hysteria in 2012, when the French government sealed off the Bucharest area and declared a state of martial law in the area. But this whole crazy chain of events was really started by Jean de Rigny making the original audio recordings. So that also got co-opted into colour. I was drawn to that at the time, back in the 90s, because the moment I heard about it, I thought, fuck, this is just like Whisper in Darkness, which is how I got kind of sucked into it.
I think that was one of the most creepy scenes in the entire film for me, when they're standing in his house and the recording is playing.
Yeah, I'm glad, because to be honest, shortly after we wrapped this, I went back up to Jean de Rigny's house. Urani's house was burned down by his family after he died, because I took one look at all the occult stuff and the drug-related things and the pornography and the cats wandering around. They just torched the place. But Jean de Rigny's former house still stands, and silently up by the source at the top of the river. And even if he's gone, I don't doubt that there's probably still things moving around underneath the floor.
Well, we should open it up to the audience to questions, yeah? Anyone have a question? I saw your hand go up first right there.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what was it like working with Colin on the score? Was that sort of like, did you know what you wanted ahead of time, or did he come to the table with ideas? How did that work with your sound design? Because obviously the two are not.
Well, he came to the table with a lot of good ideas, which was fortunate. And Colin composed most of the score out of the attic of an ancient farmhouse in Vermont. He bought a beautiful farmhouse in Vermont with a lot of wild woodland around it. And the moment I saw it, he'd put his mixing board and all his sound equipment up in this big, like, triangular attic space. I thought, okay, this is going to be all right. And I also told him right up front to not just read Colour Out of Space, but read Whisper in Darkness as well, and try to get into that audio space. And the most difficult part for him was, I guess, having to deal with the producers.
Did you know him ahead of time, or was
no.
Oh, okay.
We'd gone through a crazy process where the producers had bumped off the first composer that I wanted on the job, who was Simon Boswell. Then I bumped off the first composer the producers had put on the job, who was one of Point Tricks Never, and then Colin was the go-to guy once we'd finished fighting John.
Go ahead.
Movie done on Don't Stop on video.
No, sadly on the Aria Alexa on video. It's the first time I've shot a whole feature film on videotape, and the first time anyone's allowed me to use digital effects. I've never been able to get my hand into the digital effects toy box before, and it does give you some pretty great advantages. Amongst anything else, we can now shoot in much lower light conditions than I could ever shoot in before, which I enjoyed hugely. Of course, there's disadvantages too. It means that the moment you shoot something, everyone else in the world can see what you've shot. There's, like back in Video Village, there's 5 or 6 people watching on screens as you're shooting, and presumably there's people in China and Los Angeles who are getting the rushes and the images pretty fast after they're going into the camera, which kind of ratchets up the pressure somewhat. But otherwise enjoyed the process.
Would you ever consider shooting it in black and white?
No, because there's already a very good movie like that, which is Die Farbe, the German color out of space adaptation, which went down that route. Yeah, strong recommend.
Oh, I noticed that, like, what I was saying is sort of like felt very fantasy-like early on, and I noticed that the editing early on in the film was very quick, and I don't know, it was very, I felt like it was moving along very quickly, and I felt like it was very surreal, and then it kind of slowly changed to this more normalized sense of editing. Was that purposeful, or was that like, because I noticed that it was a little bit similar to some of the editing that I don't like, was Judge Andy, where it was like very like, here's the thing that's happening, here it is, here's the next person, we're saying this, we're creating the idea of what's happening. And I was like, oh, okay, this is creating a sense of what's happening. But then ultimately, I noticed that it really slowed down about 10 minutes, 15 minutes into that purposeful or?
I don't know, Dave, for me it kind of doesn't peak for about 20 minutes. I think the first 20 minutes are pretty slow, and then it starts to ratchet itself up.
So it's sort of rooted in the mundane at first.
Yeah, before the
Right,
meteor
like
arrives, it's
like,
a
"Dinner,
very
she's
different
come
movie.
back and-"
It's a little strange, but it's still behaving like a little bit more like a normal movie.
For your casting for the mother, how did you get Julian Richardson to take on this role? Did you say we've got a great attic scene where you're going to have a great loving embrace with your child? And really shoot your career off in different directions. Like, how did she, when she saw the script, was she excited about that scene?
Yeah, just one of the only folk who was brave enough, I guess, to respond to the script. All the guys came aboard very early. Casting Teresa and Lavinia was super hard. Lavinia didn't come aboard until 4 days before we started shooting. Trying to get those two parts locked down was very, very hard, mostly because none of them have positive character arcs. None of them are positive learning experiences. There's only really two ways out, which is either death or madness. And Jodie had never been in a horror movie like this before and hadn't ever played a monster before, so saw that largely as a challenge. And I guess something in the script to put the hook in there enough to make the Skype call. And then of all of the stuff, the way all of it connects to real life tragedies and real life characters, just as Ezra reflects Urani. Teresa's very much a reflection of my mother, who was the person who introduced me to Lovecraft to begin with. Lovecraft was her favorite author. She read me Lovecraft as a child. And starting on Dream Quest for Unknown Kadath when I was very young, which I adored. And graduated onto the core mythos stuff by the time I was 12 or 13. And then at the tail end of that experience, she died from a very lingering death from lymphoma, which lasted about 10 years and kind of changed her personality, and as well as changing her physically in various ways. And during that process, I also ended up reading her Lovecraft again, so it kind of went full circle. And at the point when her swallow mechanism finally stopped functioning, I had the option of hydrating her or basically putting her in a feeding tube, and instead decided to essentially euthanize her, which wasn't a popular decision. My sisters still don't speak to me over it. So I laid that on Jodie as the kind of truth that I was bringing to it. And just as Nick's performance is reflecting his dad. So although it's the thing's funny, we did try to root all of it in people that we know. I have a nephew named Benny, Jack, who's doing the crayon drawings while his parents attack each other, is probably the closest to myself in the movie. Yeah, there's presumably some element of that. I mean, that was one of the stranger left-of-field decisions that happened in a hotel room in Canada when I was pacing around thinking, how can I push this to the next level? Because, of course, in the Lovecraft story, both the little boy and the mother mutate and go mad, and they lock them in separate rooms in the attic. At some point, the notion of, well, what if they actually grow into each other and become one mutation rather than being two mutations in different rooms? And yeah, of course, there's that sense also of the way that if you don't escape your family or escape your parents sometimes and find some way of individuating oneself, that there's a kind of a negative gravity that drags one back into the womb or back into the family home. And I wanted to be that sense of trying to establish identity for yourself before being sucked back into the kind of group identity.
It's interesting because just one second, you've been reading the reviews obviously because you've been posting them, but one of the reviews I read was it was a little bit critical of some of the storylines because talking about the mother with breast cancer, and then in the reviewer's words, and then that never gets talked about again. But in watching the entire film, I was like, well, that reviewer clearly didn't understand what was happening at all, didn't know Lovecraft at all, because the cancer and the color and the mutation and the absorption and the melding all go together.
Clearly, death, cancer, having to deal with one's loved ones, one's parents, possibly one's children, inexorably destroyed and mutated and taken away from one by forces that one has no control over and can't stop. It's very much the theme.
I was wondering if you had any interesting bug stories. I noticed we only see one at a time. I think you were talking before about getting hundreds of the mantises.
Yeah, that mantis was super expensive.
It looked beautiful.
Yeah, well, it was only in there because Nick was obsessed with it. First 2-3 conversations we had, it was all he'd talk about. At first I thought he was kidding, and then we realized he wasn't. And somehow we would have to have a big mantis in it. I don't know why, but yeah, as a result, the mantis made it into the film, which I'm pretty pleased about.
Yes. The scene where we see that the part of the old one swirl, was there an artist who designed that before the CGI thing was created? Was there a painting or something?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, and it was pretty heavily fought over for a while before we ended up where we got to. And I'm kind of hoping that some of the design work ends up out there in some form or another. I mean, I wish that Spectre would put out an art of colour out of space book, because there's a hell of a lot. We storyboarded the whole thing as well. The whole thing was storyboarded by an overworked Portuguese comic book artist. Which,
you can sell storyboards at the lobby. Just 1 or 2 at each festival.
yeah, that thought hadn't occurred to me, but yeah, I should have brought them along.
If a major studio gave you a whole bunch of money and said, hey, make another Lovecraft film, which one would you make?
I'm pretty curious about Dunwich, or Dunwich. Most except I don't think there's ever been a screen rendition of the Waitley family that really works for me. And just think the whole concept of crossbreeding with ultra-dimensional beings, it could go a long way. I'd also like to get back on campus again, Miss Katani.
Relatedly, I'm curious if somebody got you to do another Clark Ashton Smith, what would you do?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I mean, I'm still wishing that someone would do like an animated Empire of the Necromancers, but yeah, otherwise if I got to do another short, I'd probably go after something like Maker of Gargoyles, just because it would look great in Carcassonne. Yeah?
Yes, you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I absolutely love the coloration of the foliage that you had. Once the colors started fully taking effect, it was really visually impressive.
Thank you, sir.
I noticed like a motif of triangles throughout the movie, and I swore I even saw triangles in the static. Was there like a conscious decision? Like, was there a meaning behind like the triangles, like in her hair and the attic window?
Yeah, there was generally a sort of a conscious sense to try to put it into, I guess, 3 acts as kind of sort of 3 points to Lavinia's ritual. There was a lot of debate over the magical elements of the script, which I'm sure will continue, but when we wrote the script, I worked on it with one lady who was heavily into, I guess, Gardnerian witchcraft. And then we put in a lot more of the Simon Necronomicon. Then different people complained that might curse us, and then instead another witch affiliated with the Golden Dawn came in and said, no, you should do this and this. So there was a lot of different folk suggesting what would be lucky or unlucky, which is how we ended up with I guess the ritualistic elements we had. I mean, whatever happened, it worked because we were extremely lucky on the shoot. We made every single day. In fact, finished early on the schedule and came in under budget. No humans or alpacas were harmed.
So I was kind of wondering what was happening with the dog, and I was wondering, was in the original script, was the dog going to come back, or was it always going to be just in the well?
Yeah, that's one of the things, one of the battles I lost in post. The shot of the dog at the bottom of the well was cut out, which is just one of those things. I mean, I guess people have issues with animals. Roberto Rodriguez says if the dog dies, it's a B movie. Yeah, the establishing shot of the half-dissolved dog was some of the casualties. But I assume it was subsumed into the sort of the biomass of the thing in the bottom of the well, which by then had probably already taken in a bunch of different things.
Back on the
I was just curious on which god she was praying to anyway, with the ritual.
which god she was praying
Yeah, well, the thing she's doing at the beginning is kind of a Golden Dawn protective ritual. Yeah, with the Necronomicon later, you'd probably have to check the book against the different pages, or write to the Color Out of Space occult and ritual advisor. That's right. Yeah. Varkoni's participated in Color Out of Space and asked if we were to contribute some tracks, and it is indeed Bosom.
That's what she was listening to, huh?
Yeah.
I knew it.
No, yeah. Color Out of Space brings Tommy Chong and Varkoni's together.
We have time for one last question.
I thought the inclusion of Brando was particularly hilarious, but I didn't catch the name of the movie at the end. Does it hold a specific, other than it being Brando, significance to you or the story?
Well, really only because it's public domain. It's from One-Eyed Jacks, and I really didn't want to have Night of the Living Dead on there. Because, yeah, there are very few full public domain movies out there which we could afford to have playing. It was also a way of finally getting Brando to one of the movies.
So I know The Shine isn't off of this one yet, but I think more people than just me would like to know, like, what do you have plans for something next? Do you have something brewing? Or are you just kind of taking time to kind of let this sink in?
Yeah, this is going to have to settle. I've got a few things brewing, but at the same time there's other stuff back there which are still waiting to pounce. There's a few things which aren't dead yet from the past, which I still have to deal with. And so I'll see this process through a bit further. I've got to take the movie over to London after this, and then to Sitges, Spain, and we'll catch the train up north back into where I live in the Pyrenees, and I'll reacquaint myself with my cat, and see what happens after that. And there's a few things trapped at various levels of pre-production, which colours Advent, and the fact that it now seems to have recouped may influence.